It's the Space Opera Award Show.
Ming's not unbeatable. With all his men, he couldn't even kill Flash.
Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi, with me, James.
And me, Matt. Every series on this podcast, we explore the world of science fiction cinema by taking a trip through a different subgenre of sci-fi.
This series, our journey is through the fantastical world of space opera. Hello, listeners. We have finally reached it. We've reached the end of our space opera series. It's the final episode of Series 6 of Journey Through Sci-Fi, and we have our conclusion, our award show. We've got a lot of films to go back over. We've covered so much this series, haven't we, Matt? There's an abundance of films and TV shows.
Yeah, it's our longest series so far. This is episode 27 of our space opera series, and it's time for the curtain call on this space opera journey. But before we do that, we like to look back and reflect on everything we've watched and learned this series.
I mean, that's a lot of hours of you chatting sci-fi with me and watching sci-fi films. How much of your life has been taken up by this podcast? It's a lot.
Plenty, as you well know, James.
But yeah, let's run down this incredible list of stuff we've covered on the podcast. So I think we should list out all of the films and shows that we've covered this series. It's good. Let's see how quickly we can get through this list, Matt.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, A Trip to Mars,
Flash Gordon,
Buck Rogers,
Lost in Space,
The Black Hole,
Barbarella,
Kroll,
Star Wars, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi,
Battle Beyond the Stars,
Star Crash,
Space Battleship Yamato,
Legend of the Galactic Heroes,
Flash Gordon 1980,
Buck Rogers 1979,
Masters of the Universe,
Transformers,
Jodorowsky's Dune,
and Dune 1984,
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy 1981,
and the movie from 2005,
Gundam 1981, numerous movies, trilogy, lots of them.
Macross, Do You Remember Love?
I do. Star Chaser, The Legend of Orion,
Titan AE,
The Last Starfighter,
Ender's Game,
Star Wars, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith,
Battlestar Galactica 1978 and 2003-4,
The Fifth Element,
Valerian,
Galaxy Quest,
Spaceballs,
Chronicles of Riddick,
Battlefield Earth,
Serenity,
Firefly,
Avatar,
Fantastic Planet,
John Carter,
Jupiter Ascending,
Guardians of the Galaxy,
Thor Ragnarok,
Dune 2021, Parts 1 and 2, 2024 for Part 2,
Star Wars sequel trilogy, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker,
and Star Trek 2009.
and Star Trek Discovery.
Oh, wow. I think we got through that. I'm surprised that we've covered so much this series, but I'm very impressed with the work that we've done for this series.
Yeah, 54 films and TV shows we've covered in the space opera subgenre.
I mean, it's great. And it's like, I've really enjoyed this series. It was such a palate cleanser after looking at Dystopia for a year previously. And that was just such a grim series. And then to go into this with the flamboyance, loud costumes, the comedy, the fantasy of all of the different space opera films we've looked at, and the sort of the varied nature of them as well. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's been a lot of variety, but I think we did predict early on that it was going to be a bit more light-hearted throughout. And there's some real darkness in some of these movies, but it's the exception rather than the rule, isn't it? They have continued to be, as predicted, quite light-hearted, fun, exciting movies.
Yeah, and it's always the good prevails in the end. And I think we use the word bombastic more times than I've ever used it in my life whilst talking about these
certainly.
films. Yeah. Bombastic, fantastical, all of that. But I mean, that's the essence of space opera. And for this episode, we are going to dish out our awards for the series. So these are the films which really caught our eye, and we put them in different categories. It's kind of like the Oscars of science fiction film podcasts.
Yes. We've got 8 categories to go through, and we'll be going through our nominations and then picking our winners. And I don't know if we'll always agree. We don't always agree on who we want to award it to when we do these, do we?
That's part of the fun, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think when we first started doing the podcast, you were very much the sort of like you would cut into the films a bit more. And then now I've started cutting into the films more. And it used to be like we did good cop, bad cop. And I think over the course of the series, it's both sort of more on the same level with stuff.
It really dragged you down into the gutter.
You've shown me the error of my ways, liking
Two
every
bad
film.
cops.
Two Bad Cops. It's the name of our new series coming out. But without further ado, let's get into these categories for the film awards, for the Space Opera Film Awards, Matt.
Yeah, let's go.
So say we all. So say we all.
So our first category is the Best Space Opera Protagonist. So as Brian Aldiss put it, there must be a man or woman to meet the mighty hour, someone who's going to stand up to the evil empire of the space opera and take him down at the end and good will prevail. And these are our representations of good, our favourite examples of that. So James, who are our nominees for the Best Space Opera Protagonist?
Oh, we've got quite a varied selection in this one. So first up, of course, it had to be Luke Skywalker, everyone's favourite protagonist. And then next in this category, we've got Barbarella, we've got Paul Atreides, and we've got Arthur Dent.
What a selection. We've got a real mix there as well, haven't we? I think Luke Skywalker's the most obvious one, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's a bit of the template for space opera protagonists, but we've kind of got some more variety in there as well, particularly with the rest of them, Barbarella, Paul Atreides and Arthur Dent, right?
Yeah, and I think they're all interesting because we've got Star Wars, we've got Barbarella, Dune, and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and each of those films are very different kinds of space opera. You've got Star Wars, which is the big daddy of space opera, what you imagine space opera to be, the fantastical elements. You've got Barbarella, which is got all of that fantasy to it, and a fantasy in a lot of different ways. Sexuality is a very horny film. We've got Paul Atreides in Dune, a very sort of serious, grounded space opera. And then Arthur Dent, he's just an average Brit who ends up in this crazy space opera adventure. So very varied selection, to say the least.
Yeah, so who's your favourite out of these? Who do you think should win the award?
Oh, I mean, I think it's basic to say Luke Skywalker. And is he
basic?
Is he really a great space opera protagonist, though?
I don't think he is a great space opera protagonist, but is he a good protagonist? I think he becomes one across the trilogy and even into the sequel trilogy as well. I think he's one of the better parts of the sequel trilogy. But I don't find him a particularly good action hero. And he's far from my favourite character from the start of the original Star Wars trilogy.
I mean, Barbarella feels like a bit of an action hero.
She absolutely is. She's Luke Skywalker plus Han Solo and Leia all in one.
Yeah, she's like secret agent, flying around the place, seducing all these men.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, Paul, I love Dune, but I don't know. I don't think we're supposed to like Paul that much, but I still think he makes a really interesting protagonist for that reason.
Yeah, I think the sort of changes in his character over the course of the films and all of the prophecy aspects, and it kind of twists what you would imagine a space opera protagonist to be. Because what did Brian Aldiss say? He said it needs to be a man or woman
to meet the mighty hour.
To meet the mighty hour. I mean, Paul Atreides does do that, but he's reluctant. He's the reluctant hero. Luke Skywalker's just doing it because he loves it. He wants to get off of Tatooine, off of this desert planet. And then Arthur Dent, I mean, he's just in this world because Earth gets blown up to make way for a intergalactic superhighway. But I think there's something very endearing about Arthur Dent just because the Britishness of it. He's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, this is what it is. This is what's happening now. Like taking it all a bit for granted.
So I actually think Arthur Dent is my favourite character of these four characters. I think he's the most interesting person and the most enjoyable protagonist. But he's almost like an anti-space opera protagonist, isn't he? That's the whole point of Hitchhiker, is it's kind of skewering that genre. So I think I would want to give an award to him, but it doesn't feel right. And in fact, I think I feel like it's actually appropriate to just go with the basic answer here. And I think it's got to be Luke Skywalker, hasn't it?
You reckon Luke Skywalker?
Who would you give it to?
I think you might be right. As much as I'm kind of like he's not he's not the best protagonist in the world, he is the most instantly recognizable one. And he is who you think about when you think about space operas. You think about Luke Skywalker running around with a lightsaber, saving the day, and they keep going back to him in all these Star Wars renditions.
Yeah.
He pops
Can't
up in The
escape the
Mandalorian.
Skywalker saga.
No, you can't escape the Skywalker saga. So I think you're right. I think it's probably got to be Luke, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well done, Luke. You did it.
Well done, Luke Skywalker.
A little short for a stormtrooper.
Huh? Oh, the uniform.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
You're who?
I'm here to rescue you. I've got your R2 unit. I'm here with Ben Kenobi.
Ben Kenobi, where is he?
Come on.
Okay, let's flip things around now and look at the best villain in a space opera film or TV show.
Boo!
Boo! Get over here. Who have we got? There's a lot of emperors in this category.
Yeah. We've got Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars, of course. Emperor Ming from Flash Gordon. Mr. Shadow, the big planet-sized terror approaching in Fifth Element, and Colonel Quatrich from Avatar.
Ooh.
There's an elephant in the room here, isn't there? There's someone missing from the list that we didn't feel, who becomes too redeemed over the films to be the best space opera villain, and of course that's Darth Vader, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, he's just like a fan favorite anyway. But I think Emperor Palpatine is always the one pulling the strings, or coming back to life, or adding that extra element of sinister to everything, especially with his crinkly old face.
Yeah, and Palpatine is the real villain of the Star Wars movies, for better or worse when we get into the ninth of that series. But
Palpatine, to me, is based on, he's like a less flamboyant Ming. He's just like, take away all of the flamboyance of Emperor Ming and Flash Gordon, and dumb him down, call him an emperor. He's pulling the strings, but there's something about Emperor Ming in both of the Flash Gordon imaginings that we've seen, like the 80s version and the original in the film serials. He's just such a big character.
yeah, especially for me, it's the 1980 Ming, played by Max von Sydow, just brilliantly camp. I did find him scary when I was a kid, but I think not scary at all. You know, he's so silly. But I think he's brilliant. He's so much fun.
Yeah, I think there's something about Ming definitely that really captures your imagination and is like the essence of space opera. But who else have we got? We've got Mr. Shadow, the big planet.
Mr. Shadow, yeah.
Is he a
terrifying. I don't know. He's
just like
certainly
an
the
evil
size of a
force.
planet. Yeah, an evil entity. Like the original evil, I think he's supposed to be, isn't it?
Yeah, because in that episode when we were talking to Anna Bogutskaya, it was really interesting just really delving into Mr. Shadow as a character, because you never, like, I never remember that he's like the big villain of the piece, because you never see him. He's just this ominous voice who's, again, pulling the strings. And I think for the best villain of these films and shows, it has to be somebody who's pulling the strings, who is the man behind the man.
Yeah. And they need to have a presence on screen and have a bit of a showdown with the hero, don't they?
Which Mr. Shadow doesn't. He's just ominous.
Yes, but Colonel Quatrich in Avatar absolutely does get that showdown, that amazing fight at the end of Avatar where he's got his power loader mecha suit fighting our heroes.
Yeah, old Scarface. And he is just like, he's despicable. He's a despicable guy.
He's a real bastard, isn't
He's
he?
a real bastard. It feels like they're doing some sort of like redeeming story arc to him a little bit in the films. Because in the second Avatar film, it felt like now he's got a son. Is that going to humanize him more? Is that going to be the path that he's going to go down? But yeah, is he going to do a Darth Vader later in the series of Avatar?
That's a very interesting question for the future of the Avatar films. I'm looking forward to finding out what happens there. Do you think that kind of eats into his villainous potential now that they've softened him up with, is it Spider? That is,
Yeah, Spider.
Yeah.
Big dreadlocked random guy running around with the big blue aliens of Avatar.
Do you think that diminishes his villainy?
I think so, but if you're looking at just Avatar, which is the one that we really covered this series, then he is a villain. He is the guy that you're booing off screen. Like, get off, stop trying to kill Jake Sully. What are you doing?
So who is your favourite villain out of these four?
I think it's got to be Emperor Ming for me, because he's who I think about. When I think about space opera and I think about villains, I think about Emperor Ming with his bald head and his goatee, flamboyant royal dress, going after Flash Gordon. Yeah, that's the one for me.
Yeah, and he really gets into the kind of Well, I guess Palpatine does this as well, but he gets into the kind of royalty of it. I think Palpatine is more. I mean, you get more of a sense of an empire in Star Wars, but Ming has that kind of sense of royalty. But he's much more regal than Palpatine. Palpatine doesn't feel like an emperor. He lurks in the shadows and pulls strings, and he's not actually really a face of the empire in that world. Whereas Ming is. Everyone knows what he looks like. People have got to come and pay him homage, and he's all cruel and horrible to them.
He's the merciless.
Yeah, exactly. Ming the Merciless. Yeah, long live Ming.
Yeah, long live Ming. Have an award.
So our next category is the textbook space opera. So the Brian Aldiss Award. I already mentioned the list of Brian Aldiss's, and we've talked about this a lot this series. It's a little list that sci-fi author Brian Aldiss put together about space opera, about what there needs to be for to fit into that subgenre. And I'll just run through it again. We talked about it a lot this series, but
I mean,
one more time for old time's sake,
isn't it? It's always referring back. It's been like our template.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, well, it has, yeah. And it literally is a template. So Aldiss's list is: the world must be in peril, there must be a quest, a man or woman to meet the mighty hour. That man or woman must confront aliens and exotic creatures. Space must flow past the ports like wine from a pitcher. Blood must rain down the palace steps. Ships launch out into the lowering dark. There must be a woman or man fairer than the skies, and a villain darker than a black hole. And all must come right in the end. And that's been our template, really, and we've referred to that in most of our episodes this series. So we wanted to give an award to the film that kind of encapsulates that the most.
Yes, and the films we've got in this particular category are Star Wars: A New Hope, Flash Gordon 1980, our favourite, Fifth Element, and Star Trek 2009, J.J. Abrams' adaptation, reimagining of the Star Trek franchise.
You tipped your hand a little bit there saying our favourite. Flash
I can't help it.
But I mean, you keep on referring to Star Wars as the big daddy of space opera. And, that's the other thing. We talked about Brian Aldiss an awful lot this series, and we've also referred to Star Wars nearly every episode. We referred to Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers a lot as well. Was that kind of early template, which Star Wars then borrowed in 77 and kind of reinvented for a new audience then. But there's that real dividing line in the late 70s, isn't there? There's space opera that came before Star Wars and the space opera that came after Star Wars, and everything changed then, and culture has not really recovered, to be honest.
Yeah, it's still getting made. Star Wars is still, I mean, it was recently at the time of recording, and we just had Star Wars Day.
Yes,
and everyone's still just as excited about Star Wars as they were back then. But that initial film, A New Hope, was just, I think that is textbook Aldiss, isn't it, in terms of what he imagined a space opera to be, because it's got all of those elements. They're trying to save Princess Leia from the evil ruler Darth Vader, and it's a farm boy going out, becoming this hero. All of the stuff that happens is very much textbook. They're going into space, they're having these big battles. Does blood rain down the palace steps in that film?
Well, there's no blood, but I mean, in sort of metaphorical terms,
Obi-Wan turns into a cloak, doesn't he?
Because Darth Vader doesn't get defeated, although his ship gets blown up, doesn't he? And I think you can sort of assume he's dead. Like, if no more Star Wars films were made, you'd read that Darth Vader had died. So that's your blood running down the palace steps. It's a little bit obscured.
I suppose the palace is the Death Star, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And then all of the X-Wing fighters that are dying. The palace steps is the trenches in the Death Star.
Yes, I think so. I agree with that.
And what about Flash Gordon from 1980?
Yeah, I mean, in very much the same way. I think Flash Gordon hits all the same markers. But obviously, it came out in 1980. Would it have happened without Star Wars? Star Wars takes from Flash Gordon, from the earlier Flash Gordons, and then Dino De Laurentiis wants to jump on that opportunity after Star Wars and make a movie version of Flash Gordon again.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think that film wouldn't have happened if Star Wars hadn't taken off. And we talked about that in the episode. We were very much like, this was made because Star Wars was popular, and it was in the wake of all of those space operas that came out in the 70s, Star Crash, Battle Beyond the Stars later, just like an abundance of cheap knockoff Star Wars. And then Flash Gordon comes around and it's a reimagining of that initial 50s story and all the comics and all of that sort of like rich history of it. But you're right, it might be textbook, but that particular iteration of Flash Gordon wasn't really a thing if Star Wars hadn't been about.
And now the next two, Fifth Element and Star Trek, I think these are really interesting kind of modern reimaginings of the space opera. Fifth Element in the late 90s, and then about 10 years later we get Star Trek. J.J. Abrams rebooting the Star Trek franchise in the cinema, and they're very different from Star Wars and Flash Gordon, but they have that big screen, fantastic adventure kind of feeling that I think is so important to space opera.
Yeah, definitely. And they've got like a injection of humor in both of those, which suddenly becomes part of a space opera. In all of the space operas we've covered since then, there's been like a real... It's kind of like the MCU template almost in a way. Like they've all borrowed from these films where they've got like the comedy element, the action element. There's somebody trying to save the day. There's a very clear sort of good and evil line going on. And you can skate over some of the sort of the more scientific elements. And I think that has always been a key of space opera, hasn't it? Just being able to be like, oh, there's what was it in Star Trek? The red matter.
Red matter, yeah.
Yeah, the red matter, the MacGuffin in the way of them saving the day. Like the Fifth Element's got similar things happening as well. But again, that fantastical nature of both of them. But again, would they exist without Star Wars? Probably not. I mean, Star Trek was around doing a different thing.
Yeah, but I think J.J. Abrams kind of obviously wanted to make a Star Wars film,
didn't he?
and that's how he got Star Trek off the ground there.
Yeah.
So what do you think should win the Brian Aldiss Award, the textbook space opera?
I mean, when I read out that list, I was gunning for Flash Gordon, but the way that you've sort of planted those seeds of Star Wars was there first. We were there first. Now I'm kind of like, it's got to be A New Hope, surely.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I sort of thought I would just think that Flash Gordon is my sort of favourite classical space opera movie. I think it is. I think it's the one I prefer, but I think if you're looking at like textbook space opera, it's got to be the original Star Wars. It redefined the genre.
Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, New Hope, definitely.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I suggest a new strategy, R2. Let the Wookiee win.
Who needs science, Matt?
Not anyone working in the subgenre of space opera, I'll tell you that.
And nobody in this category of awards, the Who Needs Science Award. We've got quite a group of fantastical films in here, magical in nature, lots of crazy stuff happening. What are the films in this category, Matt?
So for the Who Needs Science Award, we've got Masters of the Universe, He-Man, Krull, Fantastic Planet, Barbarella, and Thor Ragnarok.
Interesting.
What a load of nonsense movies, eh?
I mean, Masters of the Universe was a really good one to look at. I remember when we looked at that film, it was so dark compared to what I remembered. It's really quite harrowing to watch compared to the cartoon of the 80s.
Frank Langella as Skeletor, who was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and I feel like Skeletor could have been in our best villain category. But I think because he is more on the fantastical, almost medieval fantasy side of things, it feels like he's better off away from the best villains.
Yes, but it's still an absolute treat to watch him do his thing.
Yeah, definitely. Frank Langella, well done in that role. Absolutely brilliant.
Krull, which I had heard of but never seen until we did this series. Pure fantasy, but barely sci-fi at all. But it still has that space opera feel because it's on an alien planet that just happens to be populated by fantasy humans.
Definitely. And the magical glaive, which saves the day by just spinning around. This little ninja star thing that the main character's using in that. And then the evil aliens, which are trying to take over the planet. But it is essentially just a fantasy film, isn't it? So I think Master of the Universe had that kind of more scientific-y technology aspect, even though it's all bollocks. Like the what was it? The key the key, which was like a little synthesizer in Master
Oh
Universe.
yeah. And I think that the movie adaptation also tried to make it feel a bit more sci-fi because of the context of when it was made. It was trying to like cash in on sci-fi a little bit, even though that's not really where Master of the Universe feels like it sits.
Yeah, but I think Krull was, like you said, essentially more of a fantasy film. And if you look at the next one in this category, Fantastic Planet, that kind of has that fantasy element in terms of the alien world that they construct in that film is so elaborate. I remember being terrified by those little creatures that live on this planet. There was like a tree that was eating random bird creatures, just all of this stuff in there. But I think it's got more of a sciencey element because what was it? So the humans were the Oms, and then the big blue people that aren't in Avatar but are animated in this one are called...
Yeah. They're the drags, I think.
They're such a drag.
They're a drag. This is, I mean, it's definitely science fiction, but kind of surrealistic, animated sci-fi, not really bound by the science of sci-fi, I would say. And a very allegorical story as well. So the science there is really just used as a tool for the allegory.
And I think Barbarella goes down that route as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. Also, not too constrained by anything too serious, but using sci-fi tropes for fun more than anything.
Yeah, flying angels.
Oh yeah,
just like scooping Barbarella up, and all of these weird creatures that she meets along the way. The terrifying children in the ice cave that she meets. Terrifying.
Yeah.
All of those fun bits in Barbarella, and Barbarella felt very sort of like a fantasy in terms of the different places that they visit, the different set pieces. I think that's the thing in space opera. It's different alien worlds, but in Barbarella, it's all set in the same place, and that kind of grounds it more in a kind of fantasy story because it's like, we're going to go into the woods, and then we're going to go to this place, and then we're going to go to the ice caves, and then we're here. And that's how Krull works as well. But Barbarella's got the spaceships and stuff like that, and the ray guns, and that makes it more sciencey at a stretch.
Definitely, yeah. And she is this planet hopping spy essentially as well.
And Thor Ragnarok. So
yes,
he's an alien, crosses the Rainbow Bridge. He's in this one though. It does feel more in a space opera world, doesn't it? It's definitely not like medieval fantasy for this.
Well, it's kind of a meeting of the two, isn't it? We've got our Norse gods swinging hammers and axes around and fighting with lightning. But in this movie, they also cast those characters out to a hostile alien planet where they're enslaved and forced to be gladiators.
Yeah, so it's got the best of both worlds. I mean, gladiators.
So,
I mean, gladiators in space opera. We saw it in John Carter as well.
Yep.
I feel like gladiators and gladiator arenas are almost a part of space opera now, but whether Thor Ragnarok has more science in, I'm still sort of dubious.
Well, it's more like a sci-fi Get Out clause for Thor, isn't it? It's just like they can do whatever they want in terms of leaning into fantasy with this little Get Out clause. It's like, well, they're aliens. But,
it's believable now. They're aliens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of how the MCU approached its sci-fi elements, I guess, or its spacefaring elements before Guardians of the Galaxy came along.
Yeah, and then later on, it leaned into sort of the magic side of things with stuff like Doctor Strange, and it basically introduced the concept of magic and that more fantasy element into the Marvel Universe afterwards. But Thor Ragnarok, I think, is a sort of space opera. There's science in there. They've got spaceships. I'm classing that as science. They've made these mechanical objects. They've got Stan Lee giving people crazy haircuts with his crazy scissor hands.
Well, what is your favorite, or what's the best example of a who needs science space opera film?
Oh, it's got to be Krull, because
Krull, yeah.
It just felt like I was watching a fantasy film, and then every once in a while I was like, oh, they're aliens. Remember, they're aliens.
Yeah,
it's a different planet.
It shares more cinematic DNA with something like The Never-Ending Story than 2001, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not shy about it. They know what they're doing, but it gets thrown into space opera because of it's an alien race attacking, it's an alien invasion. It works, and I like the fact that it's a cross between those two.
Yeah, I agree. It's got to be Krull.
There is no time now for grief.
I have no kingdom.
kingdom may be greater than you know. You will need more than men and swords. You will need the power of the glaive.
So our next category is the best victory moment. So in a space opera film, as Brian Aldiss said, all must come right in the end. And for me, that means a space opera movie needs to have a moment at the end where you like want to pump your fist in the air and say, yes, because the bad guys are being defeated. So what are our nominees for this one, James?
So for this one, the first one up is Serenity. Then we've got Flash Gordon again. And following that is another Star Wars. This time it's Return of the Jedi. And then the final one in this category is Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, very good. I mean, I just get exciting thinking about how these movies end. They're so much fun, aren't they?
Yeah, these have great, exciting third acts full of action. Every one of these films just is a fist pump moment when it's coming towards the end.
Yeah, so Serenity, we get, and there's quite a few, isn't there, actually? The whole, like you said, the final act of the film is just amazing. You get the Serenity leading a force of Reavers to take out the Alliance fleet, and then crashing down onto the, not a planet, but it's Mr. Universe's place, isn't it? For the kind of one-on-one showdown with Mal and the operative and other, and River gets to finally unleash her fury and all of that. It's got so many great moments of action sequences at the end.
Yeah, and it's just so intense, isn't it? With River finally being able to really kick some ass.
Yeah, it's because it's got that build-up of a whole season of TV as well. It's not just an exciting end to a movie, it's an exciting end to a franchise.
And all of the jeopardy in it is added to because you've already seen some like pretty key characters being killed off just before you get
that's
to that
important.
scene. So that's really up the ante for everything. And it is really impressive. It's not the big star space fight that you would imagine for a space opera, though, is it? Because that's usually kind of what you want, sort of flying spaceships, attacking something, a la Star Wars with the Death Star. It does sort of lack that kind of element. It's a very sort of like localized one, but I don't think that diminishes the quality of that victory any less.
No, I don't think so. I mean, that stuff is happening, but it's happening in space and we don't see those space battles. We see the sort of on the ground fight scenes. But yeah, what about Flash Gordon then, where Flash rallies up all the different tribes from Ming's empire?
Gordon's alive?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's all about that. It's all about Brian Blessed flying through the air with his hawk people, just taking down the spaceships.
And Flash cruising in on the little space motorbike, or space jet ski, yeah.
Yeah, that scene is so good. It's just iconic, isn't it?
And of course, with the Queen soundtrack underneath all of it, just absolutely rousing.
Yeah, it really sort of ups the ante for that victory. And then... But yeah, then do they actually beat Emperor Ming? They do, don't they?
Yeah, they crash doesn't he get speared on the front of the battleship?
Yeah. Do you remember
the pointy end.
How the original ended? Didn't like Emperor Ming just walk off into like a pit of fire or something?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he does. Yeah, I can't remember why, but he does sort of voluntarily.
Yeah, I remember just being
off,
really sort of confused by that. He's just like, no, I'm done. I'm off.
Yeah, and we'd watched about 12 hours of Flash Gordon serial by the time we got to that point in the narrative.
Yeah,
crazy.
But I mean, the Flash Gordon 80s version, it's got a good victory.
Absolutely.
But the next one up, Return of the Jedi. That, I mean, the Ewoks jumping up in the...
Ewoks is the first thing, as you're describing...
the thing I think of. The party with the Ewoks, that is the best victory.
James.
Oh, come on, Matt. It's
Ewoks?
The Ewoks.
We got Emperor Palpatine being thrown down the bottomless pit by Darth Vader, his apprentice turned hero once more. We got a second Death Star... quite operational, being destroyed by the Millennium Falcon and all the other guys, and you're dwelling on the Ewoks party.
The Ewoks party is the best victory moment ever. And then you see the Force Ghosts and these cute little teddy bears jumping up and down. Like, yeah, it's great.
And it's like a galaxy-wide party, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's the best victory party I've seen.
Yeah.
I guess Darth Vader fighting Luke Skywalker and then Emperor Palpatine getting thrown. I guess that's good. No, that's a really good moment. It is great.
Yeah.
And like
it's
the
a great
lightning coming from his fingers and all of that. It's intense. And then they cut that with, again, another big space fight. They're trying to take down the Death Star. There's Ewoks fighting, using their ingenious ways in the woods to try and take down the evil, stupid stormtroopers. I'm here for it. I love it.
Of course. And then finally, we've got Guardians of the Galaxy, the only film out of our 54 films and TV shows that ends with a dance-off.
Yes. And you get Chris Pratt delivering that awesome line. What did he say? I'm distracting you, you turd blossom. I mean, what a line to end a film on.
And then we get, I mean, it's kind of a bit of a CGI mess, but I think it's one of the good ones in MCU. The swirling vortex of the Infinity Stone being unleashed on the bad guy.
Yeah, and just Chris Pratt singing at Ronan the Accuser. But they got the space battle as well. You've got the Nova Corps sort of attacking the Ronan's forces. You've got all of that. It's got that kind of excitement towards the end. Again, it's using the Star Wars method of both of those things intercut so that everything is like a big battle. So it's not just a localized victory. It's all of these people fighting to defeat the evil forces, the evil empire at the end of the day, do a little bit of a dance off, make it fun, and then, swirling vortexes and all of that stuff.
But James, which one is the best?
Return of the Jedi.
Oh, yeah? Okay, I was going to... For me...
Ewok Party.
Ewok Party. I can't believe it's the Ewok Party. I mean, I love the end of Return of the Jedi, but...
The Ewoks.
But for me, it's Serenity always hits so much harder because I'm such a fan. I love the TV show, even though I don't think I enjoyed the TV show as much rewatching it recently for this, but I still think that the film is so perfect. And what you were saying just now about the stakes being really high because they kill off some of the main characters. So you really don't know who's going to make it. And then every time I watch it, I still manage to feel that feeling of even though I know who survives and who doesn't, but it still gets me every time. River kind of unleashing her powers and all of that. And Mal's fight. It's all, I love it so much. It
is a powerful victory, but it's lacking one thing, and that is tiny alien teddy
Ewoks,
bears having a party, and then the force ghosts of your father and your mentor and Anakin Skywalker looking like Hayden Christensen.
I think we'll have to split the award because I think you've already listed a few reasons why I don't want to give it to Return of the Jedi, the re-edits and the Ewoks.
Well, we'll give half and half. You can each have a little piece.
Yeah.
Lovely. 2 great victories.
Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes.
Stand down. Stand down. It's finished. We're finished.
Okay, so next up, one of my favourite categories whenever we do one of these on the podcast, it's the best hidden gem of the series. And there's been some corkers, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So our 4 nominees for this are Battle Beyond the Stars, Fantastic Planet, John Carter, and Macross. Do you remember love?
Ooh, there's some good ones in there. I feel like Battle Beyond the Stars has had a lot of name checks from me throughout the series.
Yeah, you that really stuck with you, didn't it? Had you seen it? You'd seen it before?
Yeah,
the series?
I'd seen it before. Like it lacks some stuff, but I think it's just that kind of Magnificent Seven in space that is so capturing. And then obviously Zack Snyder with Rebel Moon, he's basically done the same thing. You've got all the same stuff happening in that. So it's got that kind of longevity to it. And again, it's a bit like Star Wars in terms of taking like a Kurosawa film and twisting it up a bit. But I think that one was a highlight, revisiting that for me. Yeah,
I really enjoyed discovering that. It was really charming and it had great art design as well. I remember the ship's amazing, isn't it? The model work and some of that. Yeah, that was really good. I was really enjoyed that one.
And what about Fantastic Planet? Was it fantastic for you?
Yeah, I mean, this was just a bizarre, surreal movie, but I was really glad that we covered it. People, I think, recommended it to us, didn't they, when we were planning the series? And I don't think I would have heard of it, but it was just such a strange, odd experience, wasn't it?
Oh, I love Fantastic Planet. It's just that, like you say, that surreal nature of it. It also goes up in my books because of all of the hip hop that has sampled the soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
So I think that for me gets it extra points. But then we got John Carter as well, and I remember you really were loving off this film, right?
Yeah, I loved John Carter when it came out, and I was actually really glad that when we rewatched it, I still just think it held up. I just think it's an enormous amount of fun, seriously overlooked. I think Andrew Stanton's a brilliant director. This was so much fun. I'm so gutted that we didn't get a whole series of John Carter of Mars films.
That would have been good. Would have liked to have seen where that would have gone. And like I said, when we covered that, I'm still quite interested to maybe visit the books at some point to just get that final conclusion as to what happens.
And then finally we've got Macross, Do You Remember Love? Another really weird animated movie. I've never really seen anything like this. I mean, on the one hand, it's pretty like standard fare anime mecha action film, but it's also a romance film and like a J-pop musical.
Yeah, all the best things.
Yeah. Such a weird combination, but it works incredibly well, and it left me wanting more Macross. And we did watch a bit more. We watched Macross Plus as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
Which is really good fun. It does a similar thing.
Yeah, Macross was great. And I think it's it is definitely a hidden gem because I don't think many people know about it.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating one to look at. And I think just the way you described it there with the sort of the J-pop elements, and it's a lot of like music will save the day at the end of the day as well.
Yeah.
And it like in a more J-pop way than Guardians of the Galaxy with their dance off.
Yeah.
But it's
quite straight-faced about the music, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't cheesy or stupid. It really was just like, we got to remember the lyrics. Like that's the whole thing.
I'm surprised there's not more musical space operas. I feel like someone's missing a trick.
More literal operas.
Yeah, literal operas. But I feel like adding some music, like making all of the characters sing in space, could be a way to go for a future space opera film.
Oh, you're more musical than me, so you'll have to get your pen out, start work on that.
I'm gonna Stephen Sondheim it up and then make a space opera script.
Oh my god, that'd be so good.
I would love it. But which one are we going to dish out the award to?
Well, for me, I think John Carter is my favourite of these films, but it's not a hidden gem to me. I think that the spirit of this, when we talk about this, it should be one that we discovered through this series. And I do think that like a lot of people missed John Carter, and it is a hidden gem in that sense. But not to me. I've always been a fan. So for me, I think it's Macross because it was so weird and enjoyable, and I just absolutely loved it. And it made me want to watch more Macross, and I don't think I ever would have heard of it.
Oh wow, that surprises me. But yeah,
really,
I'm really really happy that you've
because it's an anime.
Yeah,
so I chose an anime.
I'm like any chance to get you into anime. I'm like I'm here for it. Brilliant.
How about you?
I think for me, it's got to be Fantastic Planet.
Yeah, because you can't give it to Battle Beyond the Stars because you're already a fan.
Yeah, I think it's a film that I've been wanting to properly look at again for a long time. It's got a short run time. It's really fucked up. There's loads of weird stuff that I just have no idea what's going on. It's nightmare fuel in terms of all of the aliens doing weird shit. It's great. I really enjoyed Fantastic Planet. So yeah, I think that one for me.
Yeah, good. I think, we can definitely have two hidden gems, can't we? That's appropriate.
We're dishing out 2 more awards. Fantastic Planet and Macross, Do You Remember Love? Both get a little share of this award.
Tear loves Tiva. Repeat. Tear loves Tiva. Repeat.
You can sit here.
Huh?
I've got to go soon.
Okay. You see, Hikaru, she's trying to make you feel comfortable. Sit down. A man does come on strong. Sometimes that's his nature. But a girl has to fall in love, so don't resist it.
Next up, we have the award for the Space Flopera. We love bad movies here on the show. We talk about bad movies on Patreon a lot. We've got the Bad Movie Bunker, where we look at the best of the worst and the worst of the worst of sci-fi cinema. And we love talking about those dreadful movies over there. So we covered a handful of kind of flops at the box office and things that didn't quite work out as planned in space opera. So what have we selected for the award, James?
Before I read out the films in this category, I've got to say, I was laughing for like 10 minutes straight when Matt came up with the title for this award. Space Flopera is
very
just
happy with that.
Genius. So, in the Space Flopera category, we have Star Crash from 1978, brilliant. David Hasselhoff and knockoff lightsabers, all of that. Battlefield Earth, Cannot forget Battlefield Earth.
John Travolta's Ode to Scientology.
We've got Valerian. I've never seen anyone so livid to have watched a film with us as a guest than Anna when we were covering Valerian.
She made a real deal with the devil to talk about Fifth Element with us.
And then lastly in this category it's from the new Star Wars trilogy, The End to the Skywalker Saga, Rise of Skywalker.
Ooh. Controversial.
Controversial. It's the biggest one in this category, the space flopera category.
Now, Star Crash kind of flies under the radar, doesn't it? I mean, it was pretty awful, but we were talking about that in the context of the wake that was left behind by Star Wars in 1977, and as we said before, it redefined the genre, but as we saw, not always for the best.
Yeah, and I think like it was funny. It's ridiculous. It's got all those sort of Ray Harryhausen style models in there. But I don't really remember much of what happened.
Yeah, me neither. I can remember David Hasselhoff and the crappy laser swords.
Yeah, I feel like it's a flopera, but it's not stayed in my mind as like one of the worst floperas.
I think the rest of them have stuck in my mind a bit more though. So Battlefield Earth is a film that I, as a fan of bad movies, and in particular sort of tentpole movies that come crashing down, I'd wanted to see Battlefield Earth for a long time because there was a lot of build up to it when it came out, and it was just reviled immediately.
But I think when we covered it, we were like, oh, it's not as bad as we wanted it to be. We wanted it to be worse than it was.
Yeah, it was pretty crappy. I think I wanted a bit more Scientology because it wasn't actually really... There is a series of novels that is more about Scientology, but Battlefield Earth is just sci-fi by L. Ron Hubbard. It's not sort of as infused, I think, with his ideology. I don't really know the ideology behind it. But I was a little bit disappointed by that as well. I wanted a bit more full-on Scientology stuff.
I mean, in terms of flops, though, it's definitely up there. I mean, it lost a lot of money, and it was critically panned. It's a terrible, terrible film, but it could have been worse. Give us more terrible films.
Speaking of which, Valerian, Luc Besson returning to space opera after the brilliant Fifth Element, and we paired those films together. Obviously, Fifth Element, one of the absolute best of this category, and Valerian, unfortunately, one of the worst.
Yes, the film that he'd been devising since he was 14 years old did not hold up when it made it to the screen. They spent a huge amount of money making this film, but I think making Rihanna into a dancing alien and all of the other weird shit that happened in this film, and then the love story element, which just didn't connect. Yeah, it was just, the hero wasn't great. Yeah, lots of elements in this which just didn't cut it. But you liked it though.
I didn't hate it as much as everybody else did. And Anna was very angry at me for not hating it enough. But I thought it was okay. I thought it had its moments, and it had some pretty terrible moments as well, as you just mentioned. But I don't know, there was stuff I liked about it, and quite liked the main characters. I feel a bit bad saying it, you know.
But you did not like the next one in our categories, Rise of Skywalker. You were not a fan, were you?
No, a historic dropping of the ball that I don't think we'll ever see the like of again, really, to that kind of level. Just a rushed production, last minute changes, studio meddling, all the wrong intentions, just an unbelievable series of decisions, and made all the worse because I had a look at the original Colin Trevorrow script and the adaptation into a comic book there, and how much better things could have been, or at least half decent that they could have been, to end off this franchise.
The shoulda, woulda, couldas of the Skywalker saga. But yes, we didn't get that, unfortunately. And I mean, Rise of Skywalker, I still enjoyed it. I didn't love it, but it's still got elements which I like. So I feel like for me, maybe that's not going to get the Space Flopper Award.
Yeah, and hands down one of the best lightsaber battles in the whole damn franchise.
It's got the lightsaber element. I mean, that's always a clincher, isn't it? Even when you try and do it in Star Crash. Some laser swords is what we want.
I think the most iconic kind of flop has got to be Battlefield Earth, hasn't it? It's a real, almost dictionary definition of a flop, a bad movie.
Yeah, and I think about which of these films that I would be happy to watch again. I feel like I would struggle to watch Battlefield Earth again. And I think the
You'd
other
sooner watch Valerian or Star Crash.
Yeah, exactly. Star Crash, at least I can sort of laugh at it. Valerian has that amazing intro scene. So I'd watch that bit.
That's true.
And then I'd laugh at Rihanna being a crazy alien.
Yeah.
But yeah, Battlefield Earth, I just remember being a bit annoyed with it.
I think that's the one.
Yeah, so Battlefield Earth, you are the space Flopera of the series.
While you were still learning how to spell your name, I was being trained to conquer galaxies. To do anything less is a disgrace to my entire family line.
Okay, we've reached our final award, Matt. It's a big moment in Journey Through Sci-Fi history. We are deciding what the best space opera film is of the entire series. That's all of those films and shows we covered. 54 films and shows in this series, 27 episodes, the culmination of weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of watching sci-fi space operas, and it's all come down to this. The best space opera film of the series.
He's so good at tension. He's so good at narrative. So our nominees for the best space opera film that we've looked at this series are The Empire Strikes Back, Flash Gordon, Dune Part 2, and The Fifth Element.
Oh, there's some lovely films in here.
4 genuinely brilliant movies there.
Yeah, I mean, I would sit and watch all of these right now, but it would just take out an entire day and a bit. But Empire Strikes Back, I mean, that is just critically one of the biggest sort of sci-fi films as well, I think. It's just like completely changed the mold. It did something different. Everyone was like, oh, Star Wars is getting a sequel. Great. But this was like, oh my God, the twists and turns of this film.
Yeah, and very clearly establishes it as the middle film. And I think that's also really important for making the iconic trilogy of the Star Wars trilogy. So even though it's better than Return of the Jedi, it's very much got that middle film feeling about it. So it sets up a third film on the way that's going to give you this 3-part structure. And the first film doesn't really set that up because it had to be sold as maybe the only one they were going to make. So it also establishes that precedent of this enormous space opera trilogy, which and there's lots of film series that did that and sort of cemented the trilogy, but this is a very big one, especially for sci-fi.
And I think, when you look at space opera is about serialization of this kind of content and big franchises, multiple sequels, telling that story over time. And I think for that reason, Empire Strikes Back was the first time this had really happened in that way. Harking back to Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers with those serials that you would watch at the cinema, and that kind of evolution of the storyline, the different characters, the different adventures, building upon the characters, the character arcs, all of that happens in Empire Strikes Back. So I think that, without a doubt, deserves to be in this category.
Yes, as does Flash Gordon, one of my favourite movies of all time. A proper, beloved childhood movie, much like the Star Wars movies, but a proper beloved childhood movie that I think really holds up as an adult and can be appreciated in different ways as an adult, appreciating it for different reasons, appreciating more of the camp stuff, the silliness that I think didn't really resonate with me as a child, but I think holds up amazingly well, and looking cheap and tacky, but brilliant at the same time.
Yeah. And I feel like you don't really get stuff like that as much anymore.
No.
That kind of just going all out, hammy villains, all of that kind of stuff that is so important in space opera, just poking fun at it in a way. We've covered a lot of films which kind of do that in various different ways, like stuff like The Last Starfighter had elements of that, Battle Beyond the Stars. I mean, all of those films that came out after Star Wars were kind of doing a bit of that, but Flash Gordon was a big deal. It was going back to the start of space opera as like a film subgenre. And it just did it in such a fun way, over the top, camp, great villains, great heroes, iconic, silly. Yeah, one of the best.
How about Dune Part 2 then from just a few months ago? Very still fresh in the mind.
Oh, your beloved Dune, Matt.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see Denis Villeneuve finish this story off on the big screen. Well, finish it off, but I think he's going to make another one, and there's more to tell.
Yeah, like the biggest sci-fi film in a long time. It's done so well, just everywhere. Everyone was talking about Dune. And I remember you saying when we did that episode, it was exciting for you because that thing that you've been so passionate about suddenly was in the zeitgeist, and everyone's finally talking about it. And it was unexpected. We didn't know if it was going to sort of reach those heights, but it has. And also going back to the history of people making Dune films, like David Lynch, Jodorowsky, all of those people really trying to capture that world and do the world building of it and tell that story. And I think Dune Part 2, Part 1 is great, but Part 2 just really adds on everything. And it kind of does the Empire Strikes Back thing of amps up every single element of it. We're building upon this initial world that we've created. We can go to different places. We can make it bigger and better and more spectacle and really dive into these characters. And I think Dune Part 2 has all of that stuff.
Yeah, I love the first one, but it's mostly set up. And you really notice that when you watch it back. And then Part 2 is really just delivering on all those payoffs and wrapping everything up really nicely. And a really streamlined storytelling as well. So, as you mentioned, all the other filmmakers that have had a go, and it's an incredibly hard book to adapt, but it's just perfectly done. All the things that are cut with good reason, and the changes are very logical for making a more streamlined film.
Yeah, so I think that, again, deserves to be in this category. And then lastly, we've got The Fifth Element. So The Fifth Element, again, iconic space opera film. It's kind of harking back to Flash Gordon in a lot of ways. What other things about Fifth Element do you think make it deserve to be in this category?
Well, like I was saying earlier, it's that kind of, it's a slight modernization for the late 90s of the space opera genre, and way better than anything else that was doing it at that time, and also bringing in a kind of a different viewpoint from Luc Besson, a different stylistic heritage, I think, that he brought to it, that has his own kind of unique style on it. And it's such a shame that for example, Valerian didn't pan out, and that he didn't really follow up on that as his style, and do a bit more in that kind of world, or at least he didn't do it well, which is a real shame. But Fifth Element, standing alone, is just an absolutely perfect film from the late 90s.
Without a doubt. I mean, I just love Fifth Element. It's like, I will watch it whenever. It's got so much about it that is just, entertaining. It's like entertainment at its best, isn't it?
Yeah. And you said there wasn't enough singing in space opera, and this, of course, has a proper sci-fi opera scene.
It's what I've been waiting for.
Yeah.
And then they gave it to me with Fifth Element. Yeah, definitely. Iconic film. So, the big question, who are we giving this award to, Matt?
This is tough. I don't even know. I think my heart's saying Dune 2 and my head's saying Empire Strikes Back.
I'm thinking Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
Just because of breaking the mold as that sequel, and every other space opera franchise has come from Star Wars, right? Every other film that we get now has to have a sequel because it's all about trilogies and cashing in on audiences. Empire Strikes Back did that in such a new and refreshing way. But yeah, Dune Part 2's doing that again, isn't it?
And there's no Star Wars without Dune, but
oh yeah,
in cinematic terms, it's all been about Star Wars, this series, hasn't it?
I think so. So are we saying Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah.
Shall we chuck Dune Part 2 a little medal, a little second award?
Yeah, and Flash Gordon.
And Flash Gordon.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
Well, that's the awards done.
54 movies, and those are our award winners out of everything that we've looked at over the last year.
And we've had fun this series, and it's been great to go on this journey through sci-fi with all of you lovely listeners as well. We've had lots of great feedback from you all. We put out a few posts just sort of like getting your thoughts on the series, and I think we're going to run through some of those now and just find out how you felt about the show.
Yeah, we've got a mailbag. We've got some correspondence from you all. It's been great to hear from you. Let's dive in and have a little read. Thanks so much, everyone who wrote in. We got loads of lovely messages. We're not going to go through and just read all the praise, but please continue to send us praise. It was very nice to read. Thanks for saying all the nice things.
Yeah, I'm very happy that so many of you seem to enjoy the series, and it was really lovely to read all those messages from you guys. But we did also pose the question, what did we miss miss in this series? I mean, we covered a lot of ground, we covered a lot of films, but as ever, there's always certain series, certain films which we may have not put into this particular subgenre. And yeah, we've got a few suggestions from people, haven't we, Matt?
Yeah, we started in 1918 with A Trip to Mars. We've got over 100 years of space opera cinema and TV that we've been talking about, and we do try to get into every little nook and cranny, but we will never cover everything. So thanks to everyone who wrote in with some of the things that we didn't have time for. Daryl, we'll start with Daryl first. Daryl wrote in and said that we should check out Enemy Mine, which he says is a small story that has universal implications and certainly a trope in written science fiction. And he also mentions, he says, hear me out, the third act of Moonraker. Now, one of those films we have talked about, James, and did pop into our minds. Moonraker never popped into my head.
No, that's a great
It's a great shout, yeah.
I love that as an idea.
I mean, there's elements of sci-fi throughout James Bond with as he gets more into gadgets and stuff. But Moonraker being the most sci-fi James Bond movie, he literally goes into space.
Was Barbarella after Moonraker?
It would have been before Moonraker, I think, because Barbarella was 68 and Moonraker's Roger Moore, so it's got to be later, I think.
So do you think Barbarella influenced Moonraker?
I think so. It must have done, yeah.
Interesting.
But Daryl also mentions Enemy Mine, a small story with universal implications. Daryl, good news, my friend. Head on over to Patreon. We covered it as a patron's pick there. We absolutely loved it. Spoilers, we loved it.
Spoilers, it's very good. But yeah, definitely recommend that. And for anyone listening wanting a new sort of space opera film to delve into, Enemy Mine is definitely a recommendation from us. So who else have we got down here? We've got Rodders. He has said that one show he's surprised that we didn't cover was Farscape. Now, Farscape, I know, is a favourite of both of ours.
Yeah.
But yeah, as ever, it's such a big TV show. It'd be a big one to cover, wouldn't it? But I think it is. I'd say it's definitely space opera, though, right?
Yeah, definitely space opera. I love all the I love the Jim Henson workshops stuff in Farscape. It's a great looking show, and I've got really fond memories of it. I never finished Farscape. I think it kind of hit me at the wrong time, but I loved the sort of first 3 seasons. I think when it was on in that golden slot on BBC Two, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's got all of those elements of space opera. They've got a spaceship full of this eclectic group of aliens from different places. You've got an evil empire. You've got sort of the rebellion against this empire. You've got bad people turning good. It's all of those space opera elements. And I think, yeah, it definitely should be in the category of space opera.
Yeah, we'll need to do a deep dive on it at some point over on Patreon.
100%.
Andrew wrote to us and said, I wonder if you might dare to have a go at speculating what is going to work and what is going to fail in terms of science fiction over the next decade or so. What are we going to flock to see? What's going to end up being a turkey? What films from the past will give us a clue as to what's going to be successful in the future? Interesting questions. A lot to ponder on there, Andrew. James, what do you think we're going to see in the next few years of space? Well, I guess science fiction in general, but maybe specifically in space opera.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting, not in a few years, but looking at the new films that are coming out at the moment. So you've got stuff like Furiosa and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So it's kind of a revisiting of these post-apocalyptic franchises. And again, because the world is in such turmoil in general at the moment, I think we're going to see lots more speculative fiction looking at sort of like the real world aspects of what's actually happening at the moment with wars and governments. So maybe a look back to dystopian fiction, I think we might get more of that, because you look at Civil War, which we covered recently on Patreon. It's a film which is about a near future, an alternative future, and it's kind of like a warning. So I think we'll see a lot more warning science fiction films in the midst of sort of the next few years.
Yeah, I think that a lot of fiction tends to mirror like economic factors, and I think we are not in a good economy at the moment, and that leads to a sort of sense of bleakness. There's all sorts of other reasons in the world to feel bleak as well, but I think that a strong economy kind of overrides that sensation culturally. So I think until everyone kind of recovers a bit economically, we're not going to see a sort of cheerier tone. So I don't think space opera's tipped to be on the rise again, not until everyone's a bit more well off, I think. So I think, yeah, you're right. I think it's going to be that sort of bleak stuff, like post-apocalyptic and dystopian stuff like Furiosa and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. At the time of recording, neither of them are out yet, but I'm really excited to see them. I also think that within that, there's also sort of behind-the-scenes thing, which is that studios are going to remain interested in those nostalgic rebootable properties like Apes and Mad Max. They're sort of perfect fodder for it. Especially Mad Max, when you still got someone like George Miller still interested in doing stuff there. That's good news, I guess, for that franchise. And I think that there's a big question mark over Star Wars in the next few years, isn't there? There's some planned cinematic releases, but I really do think Rise of Skywalker did a huge amount of damage to that franchise. They've had some success on TV, so I think there's going to be a ton more Star Wars TV to come. And I'm very interested to see how much more juice is left in Star Wars at the cinema, or if that's DOA.
I do think there's going to be a rise in big sci-fi books having adaptations since June now.
Yeah,
I think there will be a big call for that. I know that Hyperion is in the works at the moment.
That's good news.
And that's an amazing book. So I think there's going to be more of those cropping up, because now they know they can make something like Dune, and if you've got the right director and the right production team behind it, you can really bring those stories to life.
Yeah, it's similar to that nostalgic thing, isn't it? It's about safety for the studio. It's about how safe of a success it's going to be. So if you can reboot Planet of the Apes, enormously successful franchise, great. You've got kind of a baked-in audience. And similarly, Hyperion, just widely regarded, rightly widely regarded as a fantastic book. So you're going to have a lot of sci-fi nerds excited by the prospect of that. So it's just a safe bet, I think. So I think, no changes there, but I think we'll see more of the big ones. I think the Culture, Ian Banks' Culture series will probably at some point get a go, and maybe Alistair Reynolds' books as well.
Oh, I can't wait for those. If those get adapted, that's going to be proper sci-fi.
I would really like to see Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. That's one of my favourite sci-fi books of the last 10 or so years. Just an absolutely incredible book, and I think it's doable as a film. The kind of flashback narrative structure, I think, would work really nicely.
Yeah, I can see more of that kind of stuff happening. Any sort of like Ursula Le Guin books I'd like to see adapted, because I'm a big fan of her work. But yeah, what other messages have we got here? We've got one from Tarquin. So again, on sort of like a similar topic, he said, there's a sad lack of galactic sci-fi at the cinema, primarily because of the cost, I expect. And I think that's right, isn't it? There's quite a lot, because unless you're a production company making something like Dune, to put together a decent space opera is a task.
But even Dune doesn't have that galactic sense within the film. Like it's got world building. You're aware of the galaxy, but I think I don't know if I'm misinterpreting Tarquin here, but I think the idea of galactic sci-fi, for me, what jumps out is when we watch Legend of the Galactic Heroes, that really, the sense of scale in the battles there, where you literally had tens of thousands of ships going up against each other in these battles, as it should be. When you've got like galactic empires fighting each other, it's not going to be just the Millennium Falcon fighting a Star Destroyer. It's going to be thousands of ships. It's going to be Napoleonic scale, magnified up to a galactic level. But I guess it's cheap to do that in anime. That's why Legend of the Galactic Heroes can do it. It doesn't come with the price tag that it would in live action cinema.
Yeah, anything sort of animated is able to get around that by just being able to animation is still expensive. It costs a lot to get those people doing it, but it's not the same, is it?
Yeah, and it doesn't exponentially rise. 10,000 spaceships doesn't necessarily cost exponentially more than 2 spaceships. Maybe because there's probably it might even be cheaper, some of it, 'cause, those ships are very small because we're seeing so many of them, so there's less detail than Macross, for example. The level of detail on the Macross.
And if you think about Jodorowsky's Dune, there was that kind of question mark as to whether it could have been made as an animated film. And we were like, why didn't that happen? But yeah, telling that kind of galactic sci-fi in a film is very difficult. And yeah, costs will just rise and rise.
Yeah. Speaking of anime, we also got some mailbag correspondence from Jammy Robots. Thanks for writing, Jammy. Jammy says the Lensman anime is fun, if nothing like the books. Now, I've never heard of this, James. You're the anime guy. Are you familiar with Lensman?
I have never heard of it, but I've done a bit of a Google, and
Thank you.
The Lensman series looks just textbook space opera from the looks of it. It looks like it's got like a kind of Flash Gordon character at the lead. And yeah, I think it's definitely one I'm going to look into more, because it's initially started off as a series of novels by an American author called E. Doc Smith.
Oh, okay.
So it was a runner-up for the Hugo Awards. It's got the credentials. So I think an anime series of this would be something I'd definitely be interested in. I'd be interested to see how it goes from like Western to Eastern with its sort of like philosophies and stuff, and how they tell that story. Like if there's anything that by being made as an anime, if there's anything that sort of doesn't quite translate or it gets a different sort of twist to it. But again, anime is great for this kind of stuff. And if any chance where you can make a space opera tale and animate it, I think, you're going to get something good.
Stephen wrote to us, and quite a lot of people wrote to us and said this. One thing I don't think got covered is Forbidden Planet. Does it qualify as space opera? If not, what series do you think it belongs in? Loads of people told us to watch Forbidden Planet. And it got to the point where I was a bit like, oh no, should we not cover Forbidden Planet? But I think we wanted to sort of maybe do it in future in a kind of Alien Worlds series, something along those lines, right?
Yeah, because I've seen Forbidden Planet, and I remember when we were talking about it, you kept getting confused with Fantastic Planet. I mean, very easy to do.
Yeah, I struggled with that, yeah.
And especially if you haven't seen either of them. But yeah, Forbidden Planet.
I've seen Forbidden Planet, yeah. It's Robbie the Robot, isn't it? It's the Tempest, yeah.
So it's the Tempest. And I think the one subgenre we kind of want to keep that for is our future series, or maybe something like Alien Worlds.
Yeah.
Which is slightly different to space opera. I mean, space opera is all about going to different alien worlds.
It all just blends, doesn't it?
It's just like that voyage to somewhere different and then just ending up on one localized planet and finding out the mysteries of that planet.
Yeah, I think there's something about like Strange New Worlds that Forbidden Planet is more of an iconic example of than a space opera. I don't recall much of a hero versus evil empire issue going on in Forbidden Planet, which is more just about Caliban's weird world. I don't think he's called Caliban in Forbidden Planet, but
yeah, and I mean, in the same breath, we did cover the black hole, which is sort of would almost be in the same category, but technically it's not on a planet. So if we do an Alien Worlds one, but hey, it's hard to fit them all in. But definitely, Forbidden Planet is something we want to cover in the future on the podcast.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we absolutely will.
So Johan sent us a lovely message as well. Lots of great recommendations in here. He did flag, as we just said, we can't cover everything on the show. He did say it'd be nice to hear more Star Trek movies covered. And he really considered Wrath of Khan and First Contact as proper space opera Star Trek. And I think I'd agree with that.
I think definitely with First Contact, I think Wrath of Khan, I guess, is more... Well, it has that kind of, I don't know, over-the-top theatrical villain versus hero dynamic, which I love in that film. But yeah, there's so many, I mean, as we touched on when we did our Star Trek episode, there's so many like dimensions to Star Trek and ways that it fits in and doesn't fit in with the space opera genre. I think we'll be getting around to doing every Star Trek film on Patreon, won't we? That's the best way to get through all of them.
Yeah, they deserve a proper mini-series to really delve into that, because they cover so much ground in the Star Trek films.
Yeah, Johan also mentioned the Stargate TV series, which is definitely like full-blown space opera by the time that gets going. But again, I mean, it's just what's that? I think there's 11 seasons of Stargate. I just there's so much to get through there.
It is mad. And he's also name-checked Farscape again, so more love for Farscape. And Babylon 5, which is one of your personal favourites, isn't it?
Yeah, I love Babylon 5. I think there's room for all of these. And I think that the reason we didn't cover some of these is that we want to make room for them for a bit more of a deeper dive, probably on Patreon in the future. Especially, definitely Babylon 5.
Yeah, I mean, you are dying to talk about Babylon 5.
Yeah.
You've got to try and make room for it somewhere. And we've got another message from Malcolm as well. Malcolm said, would we class V, the original series, as a Alien on Earth space opera? I think that's quite interesting. I think it would probably be like an alien invasion one, automatically. But V's, it's been a while since I've watched any of those original series of V.
I don't think I've seen the original V. I saw that sort of crappy one that came out in about 2010 with William Baccarin.
Yeah, I was into that one.
I think of it more as alien invasion. So I think similar to Forbidden Planet, where we would want to talk about alien worlds, we'd also want to talk about aliens coming to Earth, friendly or otherwise. So I think V would have pride of place in that kind of a series.
And we've also got recommendations for 2 different TV shows. So J.H. Barron recommended Blake 7. Would have been nice to have seen a chat on that. And Rodazok said Space Above and Beyond would have been nice to have had a mention. And Rogue One.
Yeah, I mean, we covered so much Star Wars that I think there wasn't really time to get into some of the stuff like Rogue One and the TV shows. It's a great movie, though.
Yeah, I don't think Rogue One's quite in the space opera category, though, just because it's less on the fantastical. It's very grounded Rogue One, isn't it? It's sort of more like that. But I think there's other 2 shouts as well from the guys, like Blake 7 and Space Above and Beyond. It'd be interesting to look at those kind of really early TV series, like those sci-fi shows, and just see how those have changed over the years. Because those were interesting shows, weren't they?
Yeah, and I think remembered in different ways, aren't they? Like Blake 7 took quite a while, I think, to kind of come around and be retrospectively enjoyed and beloved, I think, because it was a bit cheap, a bit rough around the edges. And Space Above and Beyond, I mean, I loved that. I remember that when that was on, but I hardly know any people who've seen that. Like because it only got the 1 season, didn't it? And it kind of faded from memory. I think it was too expensive. It was certainly I think it was a pretty expensive show. But yeah, it'd be interesting to revisit that as well, because I haven't seen that since it came out.
Yeah, cult followings for both of those. But that's it for the mailbag. We've had plenty of lovely messages. Again, thank you all for listening to this series, and thank you all for just joining us on the journey. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and special thanks to the people who joined us on the journey as guests this series. We've had several guests, and it's been lovely to talk to you all. So who have we had on, James?
We've had Russell Bailey, Kevin Lyons, Val Nolan, Anna Bogutskaya, Becky Dark, Mike Munzer, and Tiffany Angus. They've all joined us on the show this series.
Thanks so much to our friends who've joined us. It's been absolutely great having you on, and thank you all for listening as well.
Yes, we are going to be taking a break for a little while whilst we reset and get ready for the next series of Journey Through Sci-Fi. We're going to get our thinking caps on. We've already been having a bit of a brainstorm about what's next. We've had some great recommendations of stuff that we could potentially cover as the next series from you guys. So yeah, hold tight. We will return bigger and better than ever for another Journey Through Sci-Fi. But who knows where we're going to go? Who knows?
And if you can't wait for that, you can always join us on Patreon, where we will be continuing to release new episodes while we're on break over here.
Yes, it's been a pleasure, guys. We will see you very soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Journey Through Sci-Fi.
You can find us at journeythroughsci-fi.com, where you can find links to our social media and join the conversation.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard and want to support us, why not leave us a review on your podcast app of choice? It really helps new people find the show.
You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi, where you can receive exclusive bonus episodes every month.
Don't forget to subscribe to the show, and we'll see you again next time for another Journey Through Sci-Fi.